Assalamu alaikum. Hi, thank you for joining us today. During this pandemic, if COVID-19 was the biggest news story of 2020, then we can say vaccines will be the news story of 2021. The Canadian government has stated September 2021, the country will have enough doses to vaccinate every Canadian who wants a shot. Since the first vaccine was administered on December 14, provinces and territories have now administered over 1 million doses. In such uncertain times, with the flow of information flooding social media, we are seeing an increase in myths associated with COVID-19 vaccines. Inshallah, with vaccine rollout, better days will be ahead. And this is why we are here today to have your questions answered. I'm your moderator, Shahina Abdu, the Durham Muslim Alliance. Durham Muslim Alliance is a community-based organization. We focus on civic engagement and empowering and educating here in Durham. I'm really excited with our two healthcare panelists today. They are going to dive deep into the myths and realities of COVID-19 vaccines. So let me first introduce you to Dr. Sharkawy. Dr. Abdu Sharkawy is an internal medicine and infectious disease specialist at the University Health Network and assistant professor of medicine at the University of Toronto. He has become well known as CTV's infectious disease specialist, a healthcare advocate, and a recent piece on him in Toronto Life will leave you crying. His Twitter handle is @SharkawyMD. I love following him on Twitter, and I think everyone should too. Our second panelist is Dr. Lubna Tirmizi. She's the Chief Medical Officer at Health Expresso Inc., a primary care lead for Central East Local Health Integration Network, member of the COVID-19 Planning Committee for Durham Region. She has a passion to integrate technology to serve her patients and is the owner of Central Pickering Family Practice and Central Pickering Urgent Care. Dr. Lubna Tirmizi. Both my kids are patients at your clinic, so we've seen you around. Doctors, before we get into the question and answer period, we would love to hear a bit of your personal experience with the rollout. And I'll start with Dr. Abdu Sharkawy, who is muted. So if Amber would be able to unmute him.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Shahina, and thank you to all of you for organizing this and for those of you attending. Alhamdulillah, it's a real blessing to be able to connect with different people in our communities, albeit over rather challenging days and circumstances. But every opportunity to learn from one another is an opportunity we should embrace. We should support each other. It is our duty as good Muslims and good citizens to be able to support and help each other through these times, through whatever resources we can find. I'm hopeful that today will provide you an opportunity to understand anything of any practical value for you with respect to COVID-19 and especially as it applies to vaccines. There is a deluge of information that is unfortunately rampantly shared through different social media outlets and other communication streams. And much of it is either completely factitious or unfortunately has very negative agendas associated with it in terms of whether it's a political leaning or something else that really does not aim to serve the health and welfare of many people in our society. And I want to ensure that you can have mine and Dr. Tirmizi's trust that we are here to serve you. We're here to give you information that will help make you feel confident and hopeful that you have the knowledge to make an informed decision, that you have some comfort and some hope to look forward to get through these difficult days and to look forward to a future that inshallah is brighter and stronger for all of us. Thank you very much for inviting me here today.
No, thank you. And then Dr. Tirmizi.
Thank you, Shahina. So I would love to welcome everyone from the Durham region and everyone else around Durham region for being on the call today. I guess what I'd like to do today is give a little bit of information about what's happening regionally and locally. To just create a little bit of reassurance about, the fact that everyone in Durham is important in terms of the vaccine rollout, and maybe just to give a bit more information about the actual planning on what's going on sort of behind the scenes. And I don't know if that's the time to do that right now, Shahina, or you want me to wait a little bit?
No, I think we have a few minutes. Definitely dive in.
So basically what I'd like to introduce is there is, like in every other region, Durham has a vaccine steering committee. It's led by public health. Obviously, phase 1 has already started since December, whether you're downtown Toronto or throughout some of the other regions throughout Ontario. Phase 1 was essentially, part of that was pilot, which was completed with many of the healthcare workers, as well as staff and residents living in long-term care facilities, which is still underway. Now, this is specifically targeted. Phase 1 was led by hospitals in Durham. That would be Lakeridge Health Ontario, Lakeridge Health Oshawa, sorry. So basically, the priority was really all of the long-term care home residents, many of the retirement home, I wouldn't say all of, just because we haven't completed the full list yet. And this was actually in conjunction with public health, but not led by public health. So phase 1 is still kind of ongoing with the vaccine number 2s. Now for phase 2, which will be March to July, public health is the lead in Durham region, collaboration with Lakeridge Health, as well as paramed services, and with us, the family physicians as well, hopefully pharmacies in the area. The goal is really to follow the guidelines nationally with the priority populations, which I won't go into detail right now, but it would be anyone that's high risk for severe illness, or anyone that's working really with patients in nursing homes, as well as retirement home, hospitals, and then some of the, I guess I would say, functional employees, which would be teachers, and the list goes on. So I think phase 2, our goal is to try to find healthcare hubs or community hubs for vaccine rollout, where we would follow the guidelines in terms of the priority population. And basically we're all, I'm not sort of on the steering committee, but as a primary care lead, we're all sort of collaborating and trying to identify geographical hubs that would be relevant for the community in Durham. And third would be phase 3 to start sort of in late summer, early fall. And that really is to focus on the general population. We as family doctors, I would say we're inundated with questions every day. The number one thing I'll say, and I'm sure Dr. Sharkawy would agree, we've gotten both vaccines. I have, and I'm sure he has. Really, it isn't more than, in terms of side effects, you would see pretty typical of what we see with regular vaccines. So as far as what day to day, we are sort of inundated with a lot of questions. And part of the fear really is, am I going to get sick like COVID with the vaccine? So that's actually one of the biggest reasons I'm on the call today, just to give some reassurance on a day-to-day level, because we, whether it's urgent care, whether it's primary care, those are some of the things I'm seeing sort of day in, day out from patients and families. So.
Absolutely. And your family physician is usually the first line of care when it comes to healthcare, and you guys get the most questions. Okay, so we're going to start our question and answer period. We are limited with our time, and we understand you have a lot of questions. Please direct your questions in the group chat. We hope to have as many questions answered in the next hour. So let's dive in. We kind of prepared something for you guys. It's a rapid fire round of debunking 5 common myths. So I'm going to throw a myth out, and Dr. Sharkawy and Dr. Tirmizi will debunk the myth. Are you guys ready?
Think so.
Good. The first one. The vaccines were developed too quickly. Dr. Sharkawy.
Probably the most common fear and question that is raised is, how do we trust these vaccines? Because they were devised and designed and deployed in record time. Valid question. We keep hearing the words unprecedented and historic over the past year. You're probably sick of hearing those words, but they're real. This is a historic evolution of scientific research. We've never been in a more privileged position in terms of science and biotechnology being able to do things in record speed. We were amazed and incredibly fortunate that within a month of recognizing this virus, we were actually able to sequence the virus and the genome itself right here in Toronto at Sunnybrook Hospital. That was an amazing accomplishment. That would not have been possible even 5 years ago, for example. So our technology alone has progressed to the point in which we can do things we weren't able to do. The second really important factor here to understand is the urgency of the situation led to the pooling of resources in a way that would not have occurred under typical circumstances. Because this is a virus that was affecting the entire world, millions of people were dying, there was a necessary urgency attached to it. And that meant that a lot of attention was directed by a whole band of different researchers and pharmaceutical firms to make this a priority. That's a good thing. There was a tremendous amount of collaboration, and there were other things that were ignored, which were of lesser priority. Now, by doing that, it didn't mean that any shortcuts were taken. Normally, it takes several years to go from phase 1 of a trial, which requires maybe a handful of volunteers, to phase 3, which might get into several hundred to thousands of volunteers. And then to test that in a situation where you could see that there would be an impact of a particular vaccine with enough circulating infection to be the real background and say, is it making a difference? So we were lucky enough that there were more than enough volunteers who were willing to allow a phase 3 study to occur. We had 30,000 people in the Moderna study. There were 44,000 people in the Pfizer study. That happened over a period of months instead of a period of several years, but it's still the requisite amount of people necessary to make an effective and safe evaluation with. The other thing is that the safety evaluations were also followed very carefully to the letter of the law. You've all probably remembered there were big press releases around patients who had something potentially related to a neurological syndrome called transverse myelitis. Trials were halted for several days. In some cases, it was close to 2 to 3 weeks before they were resumed. So the trials did what they were supposed to do in terms of following protocol. They didn't rush through. They waited and made sure that those events were not attributable to the vaccine, and they proceeded thereafter. Okay, so safety evaluation was followed. The stages of development through different trials were followed. Okay, and no shortcuts were taken. And a word about safety. This may be a different question, but I think this may be just as easy a time to answer it. There's a lot of people who say, okay, but they still haven't been around for very long. How can we trust that, these trials just finished, 2 to 3 months ago? How do we know that something's not going to happen? If I get my vaccine now, maybe I'm going to get sick in the fall. Maybe something's going to happen to me in the winter or next year. So that's not generally what happens with vaccine side effects. In the history of vaccines, if you look back over the last 100 years, through seasonal vaccines or updated vaccines that we're getting for things like measles or mumps or polio or tetanus or anything else, over 90% of the side effects occur within 30 to 45 days. Okay, it's extremely rare that you get a vaccine in 2020 and you're going to get a side effect in 2024. It just does not happen. Our immune system doesn't work that way. Our body doesn't respond that way to a vaccination. And these trials did their homework. What they did was they decided that they would wait until at least 50% of the volunteers had their second dose in the Pfizer and the Moderna study. And then they waited for 60 days beyond that before they decided that there weren't any relevant or serious safety signals. So you can see they even went beyond what is the typical time frame at 30 to 45 days to decide that these vaccines were safe. So even though the time scale seems compressed, all the rules were followed and the vaccine seemed to have passed the test. CDC registry just showed that over 2 million people who were vaccinated, 89% of them had side effects that disappeared within 48 hours. Not a single death attributable to the vaccines. And over those 2 million people, just somewhere in the neighborhood around 300 people even felt that it was necessary to go to the emergency room to get checked out. Imagine how frequently people go to the emergency for things like severe back pain or a fever or something else. Out of 2 million people, that many people, only around 300 decided it was worth going to the emergency room, and they all did fine. So I can tell you these vaccines are very safe. They were designed and devised properly, and I think the data speaks for itself. Shaina, I think you're muted.
Okay, sorry, I was having technical difficulty and we kind of went off, so I'm back. Okay, so sorry, I completely missed that entire part. I have no idea what happened or what you guys said, but I'm hoping that was the myths debunked. Some of them were answered.
No, I only answered one. I think I should hand the baton over to Dr. Tirmizi, but
okay, perfect.
You did an excellent job. Okay, so.
Okay, so the next one, we still need long-term data before we know the vaccines are safe. And I think that may almost go into the first one, right?
Yeah, so Dr. Sharkawy did answer that, yes. So.
Okay, so let's try another one. There are dangerous ingredients in these vaccines.
So I think I would say more like all vaccines, like Dr. Sharkawy gave a great summary explanation for the vaccine itself. I think what I would say is focus on, I'd like to express it more as qualitatively, all of the safety guidelines have been followed to a T. I think quantitatively, we've had realignment of resources just to get things moving quicker and to get it out as fast as we can, just in terms of the burden of disease. But I would also say that one of the things that I found over the last 2 months, especially for all of the people on the call today, keep in mind that if you are going to be starting to get your vaccine in sort of spring or summer, we're going to have several thousand people ahead of you already vaccinated with both doses. You're going to have another sort of this whole timeline of 30 to maybe 90 or 120 days ahead of you already in terms of any sort of reactions or side effects that we're going to be seeing. There is nothing in terms of new or unsafe ingredients that are in this vaccine. So
maybe I can just add to that a little bit so that people are aware. There's no mystifying or sinister ingredients in these vaccines. There's a lot of boring things in vaccines. Okay, so the active ingredient in the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines is mRNA. That is synthetic material that's made in a lab, and it's not harmful in any way. It's injected, goes into your cells, and it instructs your cells like a USB key that's plugged into your computer to start making the spike protein. And your body then responds to that with antibodies, which is exactly what you're doing. That's the active ingredient. There is no evidence that mRNA is harmful. It's been used in technology for vaccines and other things for 50 years. And there's been no safety signal associated with it. It's not going to alter your DNA or cause you to develop cancer at some point. It's completely safe. Anything that you hear otherwise is totally unfounded. Absolutely. The other things are really boring. What do I mean by boring? There are salts, things like potassium chloride, literally sodium chloride. There are different forms of sugar that are in the vaccine and water. And these are there to stabilize the pH value of the vaccine so that it's stable enough to get into your cells without being broken down. And then the main component, which I think is of interest, is the lipid. So the lipid is like a housing. It's like a sheath that goes around the mRNA. And that allows the mRNA to get into your cells without being broken down. Okay, it's a shield for it. And once it gets into the cells, the lipid starts to break down and it dissipates. It goes away. And we believe that the lipid component is the main determinant of the stability of the vaccine, which is why the Pfizer vaccine needs to be frozen at these ultra cold temperatures and the Moderna vaccine doesn't. We also think that it's probably the most likely reason people will have an allergic reaction of some kind. And the main component is something called PEG, polyethylene glycol. It's in preps for colonoscopies. It's in a whole wide range of pharmaceutical products, in medications, and in foods. And most people don't die from foods, pharmaceutical products, or colonoscopy preps. They do just fine, okay? But that's believed to be the most common reason that anyone would have an allergic reaction. And it bears no correlation whatsoever to an allergy with penicillin, for example, or having asthma, or having hay fever, or ragweed, or pollen allergies, or shellfish allergies, or anything else. Zero correlation whatsoever, okay? So the ingredients are very safe. They're not going to be associated with any serious tendency for an allergic reaction or anaphylaxis. And they're designed largely to keep the vaccine stable and allow it to do what it does without being degraded in your body.
That's really helpful. My daughter has a severe peanut allergy. So that really helps us as a family out when it is available to children, right?
Yes.
Okay, so there's one popular myth: the vaccine has fetal components.
No, so it doesn't.
Yeah.
No, let me explain that a little bit, because I think it's important. These vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, have nothing of the sort. The active ingredient and the way in which it's deployed is through this mRNA, this genetic code that is synthesized in a lab by human beings. Now, there is some truth to what's called a fetal cell line. All right, a fetal cell line is a medium, if you will. It's almost like a culture medium that allows cells to actually manufacture themselves, replicate themselves in mass quantities very efficiently. And they're derived from two. I'm using two fingers here holding up to show you exactly two abortions that occurred, one in 1973 and another in 1985. From those two single abortions alone, millions upon millions of vaccines have been made over the last 30 to 40 years. They are used for the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. They're used for polio vaccine. They're used for the Varivax, the varicella vaccine for chickenpox. It is the same two aborted fetuses that are providing the ground for these vaccines to be developed. It is not a perpetuation of abortions. There are no more abortions that are occurring to allow us to have vaccines, okay? The AstraZeneca vaccine, the Johnson & Johnson vaccines do use this technology. They will be used. But I can tell you from an Islamic jurisprudence point of view, I have spoken to many scholars, and I think when we use our hikmah, our wisdom, and our sense of common, intelligence, we can recognize that this is not perpetuating something that we are against from an ethical and a point of view of our deen, okay? We are using something that has already been exploited, and it's providing a necessary benefit to save lives the world over. Every Islamic scholar that I have spoken to, every imam, has said that this is absolutely 100% okay from a Sharia standpoint, from a fiqh standpoint, and that we should do this. If there are no alternatives available to us to save people's lives, definitely we should do what is necessary. But even from the point of view of saying, we agree or disagree with abortion, I think there is still a case to be made that this is something that is making something good and deriving a benefit.
Absolutely.
That unfortunately was a a tragic situation 30 or 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're just going to dive into the live question and answer period. And there's so many amazing, great questions that are coming in. So the first one is from Omar, and he's asking, who is eligible to take the vaccine?
At this stage? So at the current
stage. Oh, for sure, at this stage.
So we're still in phase 1, which would be basically anyone, as we mentioned earlier, that would be healthcare workers that are working directly in the hospital setting, as well as long-term care, as well as, and when I say healthcare workers, it would be PSWs, nursing staff, all of the staff affiliated with retirement home, nursing home, hospital, so direct patient contact. And then it would be the patients themselves that are the high-risk patients in congregate settings. Now, as far as any other, so I will definitely say one sort of add-on the region of Durham has done a great job when the vaccine, just so, especially with Pfizer, so that there wouldn't be any wastage. What they did, so the vaccine rollout with Lakeridge specifically, they reached out to local healthcare providers in the community and said, do you have your own sort of team of doctors, nurses, frontline workers that are available within the next sort of 30 to 60 minutes to get vaccinated if they did have leftover vaccines when they were vaccinating at a long-term care site or a retirement home site. So that's currently what we're doing. So people in the public or community are not being vaccinated. The only other exceptions are sort of high-risk home care essential workers that are providing care to patients that would otherwise be in long-term care settings. So,
okay. And what about age groups?
Mm-hmm. So age groups, at this point, it's not really, obviously we're not doing any peds, right? So with what that's not really even a criteria in this stage that we're at. Eventually in the community rollout, I believe it's going to go down by either increments of 5 or 10, starting with age 80 and up. That would be sort of the priority population in the community when we do the rollout, so.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Tahira. There are many old age citizens that are at home getting home care. I have not heard anyone talking about them vaccinated. Shouldn't there be a database and contact for those citizens?
There is.
Okay.
So maybe I'll start, Dr. Sharkawy, and you can take over if there's any thing you want to add. But I was going to say that if they're in the home care database, they are already in the database for anyone that's going to follow that criteria with either high risk for severe illness or the age criteria for 80 and up. And I guess locally, the Central East Lynn Home Care has done an excellent job in terms of tracking that, whether it's on the private side or the public side with all the patients getting home care. So.
Okay, that's good to know. Eileen's asking, how are individuals at high risk identified? Is asthma and hypertension considered high risk? And if so, do family doctors administer the vaccine?
Yeah, sure. Right now, the risk categories, are not perfectly defined because there's going to be overlapping areas of risk. So someone may be 25 and have severe asthma that's bad enough that it requires immunosuppressive therapy with biologic drugs, for example, or somebody may be 55 and have a very mild asthma. They're not necessarily going to be equally, stratified in terms of how high the risk is. I think there's going to be a lot of individual discretion, and I'm hopeful that that will be something that is assigned to family physicians and primary care providers who I think are in the best position to understand their patients and to know exactly what their true immune status is. Right now, unfortunately, family physicians have not been given, I think, the best opportunity to be part of the vaccine administration process. It's happening in very fragmented pieces that are more related to pilot projects in terms of helping out in long-term care facilities, for example. But I'm sure Dr. Tirmizi would agree with me that I think that that's not ideal. In the future, I think at some point, ideally in phase 2, it would be best to have as many family physicians involved to use their clinics and to use their knowledge, their expertise, and their familiarity with their own patients to be able to identify those at highest risks and to make that determination. Someone who is 80 and above will definitely be high risk no matter what, but somebody who's 45 and has very bad Crohn's disease, for example, or some other serious immune, altering condition, I think is going to merit some recognition and will need to be prioritized. But I think family physicians are probably the best in the best position to be able to do that.
Okay. Shahina, I just want to add that, I think for a lot of people, the reassurance also comes from the fact that what we're following in every region, as well as like the province, obviously, is the National Advisory Committee on Immunizations. They have guidelines. It's excellent. It's based on their principles of equity, feasibility, as well as acceptability. So we're going to look at the whole picture, and each region is really taking those principles to heart when they're planning sort of the vaccine rollout and saying, okay, what are the populations, say, for example, in Durham region, for example, if we have a lot of say members of the First Nations communities that may be overrepresented compared to a different region. So our focus is going to be really population dependent too and regional. There is a strong sort of emphasis on these, I would call them almost like primary care hubs, where there will be family doctor collaborations with the hubs in the community. I think with the safety of the vaccine, the storage of the vaccine, public health really does need to lead that. But at the same time, there is a big push on the concept of education support from your family doctor and their involvement in the whole vaccine rollout. And we do have a lot of emphasis and say in terms of which high-risk groups we think are important in the community. And there is many sort of champions in primary care that are really pushing for that. So if there's patients in the community who might be 25 or 45 that have autoimmune disorders or any conditions that need them to be sort of highlighted, just like an 80-year-old who may be healthy, we are really trying to focus on that. Okay.
Perfect.
China, can I just I think maybe when you were technically glitched out, you might have missed some things, because I think there's some important questions and I just want to make sure we don't run out of time and miss them, because I know somebody will want to know the answers to them. Specifically, the issues around pregnancy and fertility. Yes. And then the question around, what changes once you get vaccinated in terms of the precautions you need to take and the way that you lead your lives. How should that change? And Dr. Tirmizi, feel free to hijack or piggyback on top of this, because I'm sure you have some important input here.
Yeah.
Pregnancy is one, again, that is full of myths around fear that is not based here. There's a lot of things that will help reassure us that this vaccine is safe in pregnancy. First of all, although animals are animals and humans are humans, often when there's a serious issue with pregnancy, we see that there's a signal in animals, and a drug or anything that is being marketed gets a designation from A to D in terms of its safety. Completely clear in terms of any safety signals with respect to animals. It was safe. And then you could say, okay, well, but what happens in real life? The trial specifically intended to exclude pregnant patients because they didn't want to put them at undue risk. But because life happens and people don't always follow the rules, or, things happen unexpectedly, there were pregnant people that ended up in both the Pfizer and the Moderna trial. There was in fact 23 in the Pfizer study, 12 of whom did get the vaccine, 11 who got the placebo, and there were 7 in the Moderna study, 6 of whom got the vaccine, 7 of whom didn't, ended up with placebo. There were only 3 abortions that occurred. 2 of them were spontaneous and 1 of them was planned. All of them happened in the placebo group. So all of the pregnant patients in both studies actually did fine. There was no complications with their pregnancies and they were fine afterwards. Okay. The other thing is that we have pretty good history that most vaccines, especially killed vaccines, which the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are, they don't contain live virus, are 100% safe in women. Okay, so pregnant women can get the flu vaccine, pregnant women can get the pneumonia vaccine, pregnant women can get a lot of routine vaccines that are killed, that don't contain live virus, and it's absolutely safe for them. The converse needs to really be appreciated as well. Okay, the risk of having a serious complication during pregnancy with something called preeclampsia, or hypertension, high blood pressure, seizures, and things that can lead to premature labor and complications for the fetus, or preterm birth and other problems after the child is born are significant compared to pregnant women who don't have COVID-19. So as is the case most of the time, the disease is far, far worse than the vaccine that has been developed to try and prevent it. And that's very true here with COVID-19. So please take assurance in that. Know that the World Health Organization, in addition to the Center for Disease Control, in addition to all the big governing bodies from obstetrics and gynecology, have all approved this vaccine for pregnant.
Perfect. That's a great thing. Okay, so the next one is from Syra, and I think this is a great question.
Sorry, can I just add the fertility bit, since I think it's related, and then?
Absolutely, for sure. Go ahead.
The fertility bit is also based on some pretty bad misinformation. The risk of becoming infertile due to these vaccines is non-existent. What came about that made this story emerge was something was propagated by a German physician who has stopped practicing medicine since 1994. His name is Wolfgang Udarg, along with a disgruntled Pfizer former employee who thought that they would do their level best to try and halt the approval of the Pfizer vaccine. So right there, you know that there's an ulterior motive that you have to question. What they did was they suggested that a protein, which is present in placental tissue, called syncytin-1, it shares some information with the spike protein for the coronavirus. Okay. And so what they proposed was that if we started to make antibodies through the vaccine that attack the spike protein, they were just as likely to attack the placental protein and to prevent people from becoming safely pregnant. The only problem is they didn't mention the fact that the amount of genetic information shared between this protein and the spike protein was equivalent to maybe having the same last digit in a phone number. So if Dr. Tirmizi and I both had the number 6 at the end of our phone number, that's about how much similarity there is between these two proteins. So no basis to this whatsoever. And you can see the world over that people who have had this vaccine have been able to become pregnant as well. There's no signal at all that it's led to infertility. Apologize, just wanted to tag that along to pregnancy.
No, and it's really helpful. So Sarah's asking, does the COVID-19 vaccine prevent you from spreading the virus, or do they just protect you from getting sick?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's kind of I would probably say there's two parts to this question. One would be, first of all, I just want to make it clear because I have a ton of friends that are nurses and PSWs in long-term care, which, as everyone knows, it's probably the highest incidence that we're seeing right now in terms of severe disease with the elderly. But what I would make clear is that even if you're vaccinated, remember, you may still be able to get COVID, right? It just doesn't mean that, I really will say that I've had a lot of colleagues that actually have been positive for COVID, 3-4 weeks afterwards. But their level of disease is, and I would say symptoms, is very, very minimal. So it doesn't mean that you're like any vaccine. So it can be exactly like, any of the other vaccines, like the flu shot, for example. We're not guaranteeing when we give you the flu shot that you're never going to get the flu, right? What we're trying to do is reduce the burden of the disease and create something that we call herd immunity, right? So I think keep that in mind, that you're not going to prevent COVID entirely. And that's not really the purpose of any vaccine, to prevent the disease entirely. As far as anything else in terms of how sick you would get if you were to actually get it after the fact, you know what? It's going to be we don't know. Those are answers or questions that are not answered yet. We're probably looking at a big sort of study group, but the long-term sort of outplay of what happens is not really there yet. And I think the reassurance would come from the fact that we're looking at a lot of positive data now, right? So.
Yeah, no, that's a great explanation.
Maybe I'll just add on to that a little bit, that the real key here is time. And what that means is that immunity is a dynamic process, and it's an incrementally gained process over time. And that's the whole basis, even why some vaccines require the booster dose at 21 days or 28 days, or in many cases, it may have to be a little longer than that because of some of the shortages we're dealing with right now. And what happens is that your immune system goes through different stages where it's releasing sort of a crude response, a very generic response to the invading threat that it's recognizing, and then what's called a memory response. And you develop these antibodies that are called B memory cells. And that's when you're really fortifying your response and recognition of what the virus is and what the threat is. And you are in a much more reliable position to then defend yourself, hopefully against getting the disease entirely. But what's really important to understand is that takes time. It may be as little as a few weeks if you're really young and healthy. It may be up to 3 months or longer if you're not so healthy, you're older, your immune system isn't perfect. So in that period of time, there are gaps and there are cracks in your immune system's armor through which you may potentially become infected. And you may potentially still be able to transmit the virus to others. And that's why it's just so important that when you get your vaccine, it's not a passport for immunity to say you can stop wearing your mask, you can start visiting your Nani Jan or your Dadu, or, you get multi-generational visits or anything else. You go about business just like you have been all the past several months, but do it with a greater sense of hope and confidence that you're that much closer to protecting yourself and everyone around you. And that herd immunity is going to take a long time. 70 to 85% of our population is what we're looking at. So we're looking at close to the end of 2021 before that's
definitely fallen in the end. Yeah.
And that kind of leads into our next question, and it's from Farhan, and his question kind of relates to this. How much difference could the vaccine make in our current lifestyle in the coming few months, depending on 10% of the population are vaccinated to almost everyone is vaccinated, hopefully by September 2021? Would you be able to go back to our regular daily lifestyle pre-COVID by end of 2021?
No, I don't think so either. I think we all have to focus on what Dr. Sharkawy just said, is that sort of immunity and the time that it takes to build immunity and the number or the percentage of people in the population that have to be vaccinated. And I think this is why it's so important for everyone to realize that, these numbers count. How many of us are open to the vaccine counts. And I think with Farhan's question, it's really going to be up to all of us to educate each other and say that it's important, get vaccinated and spread the word, and just in terms of safety so that we can get back to normal. So I would say it's really far-fetched with fall or winter. Yeah.
Yeah.
2021. Yeah.
And the other
Okay,
important thing here is these variants, right? We keep hearing about these crazy and scary strains. I've dubbed them the scary.
Sorry, I'm just gonna put a thing in there. So the next question is from Yasmin, and it speaks about variants, and it says, I'm hearing about all the different variants. Will these vaccines provide protection? So
yeah, okay, so perfect segue. I didn't even know there, but glad that it was planted there perfectly. The short answer to that is we think that there's going to be fairly decent protection. The longer answer is it's not going to be anywhere near as ideal as we would have hoped, and certainly not as good as the vaccine protection would be for what are called the wild type strains, the non-mutant strains. These strains, they're more problematic because if you can imagine, they're kind of stickier. When they get inside your lungs and you ingest them, they stick to your cells with a greater level of determination. They carry more virus with them. They pack a bigger punch, and that makes it more likely that not only you're going to get sicker from having this strain, but you're going to be able to share it because there's more living virus. Every time you breathe, you cough, you sneeze around anybody that's close to you. So some of the estimates from the vaccines that have already been developed show that against the British variant, we might be doing okay, maybe somewhere in the range of around 70% protection compared to 90 plus for the wild type. When we look at the South African strains, it's not as good. It seems to be much lower, around 55%. So that's a big drop. And we still don't have enough data on the Brazilian strain right now. So there's a lot of people, myself included, who worry that we haven't seen the end of these variants, that they're going to start spiking, and that we may see new variants as well. And we've seen situations where the same person has two variants in the UK, where they've got both the British and the South African strains. So that is a bit worrisome. And that's why it's just so important that we stick to the tried and true practices of masking and limiting our contacts and not tempting ourselves to go back to business as usual, because that will tempt fate and allow these variants to actually spread more and more. And they're going to put a bigger burden of stress and a challenge on our vaccines to do something that they're not right now engineered and designed to do as reliably as we'd like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We've got some very specific questions next, and this one's from Marie, and she says, is vaccine recommended for lady dealing with Lyme disease? Thank you.
So, I actually may know this patient well. So I'll say, I think a lot of people have to realize with some of these, Lyme disease, and sometimes we see the post-viral syndromes associated with so many different things, where chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, these are sort of the day-to-day things as a family doctor we really do see in our patients. I would strongly encourage those patients to get vaccinated still. And there is no reason that you wouldn't get the vaccine. I did want to just, Shahina, just go back to one of the things that Dr. Sharkawy did say with the concept of, remember, this is a work in progress. So I think everyone has to realize, just the same way that we have this openness to other vaccines, we can use the seasonal flu shot vaccine as an example, but then there's the shingles vaccines. There's so many other vaccines, but I do want people to realize that, have an openness that this is a progress, or a work in progress in terms of development, all of the variants, everything that we're doing. This isn't sort of end story, right? Like, we really want to say that, we want business to get back to usual, but that means cooperation and collaboration with everyone, where these vaccines are going to develop, they're going to change, they might morph a little bit, taking into account what we're seeing with the variants, and, we may have boosters next year. So there's so many open-ended questions, but it really is like, you want to look at the probability of, like, pros and cons with, what the risk is when you're somebody who's kind of on the fence thinking, okay, would it be good for me to get the vaccine versus if I actually was infected with COVID? So I think when you think about those numbers, it's really important to realize that when you think about infection, you're thinking about a community of infection because it is so infectious that there's people around you, whether it's at work, whether it's at home. That's what's going to halt our getting back to normal. It's so the more people that start to think, okay, we can do some prevention here, and then with caution, which would mean all of the protective guidelines like the masking, the social distancing, the washing hands, all of those things we're already used to that are going to be day-to-day sort of procedure protocol, we can really start to move forward. But really keep in mind that there may be some changes still, and that's just the reality of what science is and what medicine is. So
Yeah.
And
We have another really specific, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. Just wanted to add on because I think maybe part of the question is there anyone who shouldn't get the vaccine? And there is such a small number of people who fit into that category that it can't be overstated. The only people who really shouldn't be getting this vaccine are people that are acutely and quite unwell right now. So if you've got a bad infection, you've got a pneumonia right now, a terrible sinus infection, you're suffering from something that is clearly making you ill, you shouldn't get this vaccine. You shouldn't get any vaccine. And the reasons for that are twofold. One is your immune system's already depleted. It's trying to fight an existing infection off. So it's not going to do a very good job uptaking the vaccine. The other is your chance of a side effect does go up when you're taking a vaccine and you're acutely ill. So that's a very small number of people. I don't think anybody who's suffering from an acute illness would want a vaccine, let alone be eligible. And I also want to point out that one myth is that if you've had COVID, you don't need the vaccine, that, you're fine. So you may become immune naturally if you've had COVID and you've survived it. Usually it takes somewhere in the neighborhood of around 3 months for those antibodies to be firmly established. And studies have shown us that they can last up to 7 or 8 months. The problem is, and potentially longer, the problem is we don't have a valid way of proving that. There are commercial antibody tests that are available. You can go pay $75 to $110 at a Dynacare or a Life Labs and get an antibody test. But these are not tests that are validated to be used for clinical purposes. People are doing these tests to give themselves a sort of indication as to whether they may be immune or not. And obviously, from an equity standpoint, not everybody can afford that. We can't expect everybody to have to foot that bill to ask themselves whether they think they're immune or not. So even if you've had COVID, in most cases, especially if you're in a higher risk group, like you're a nurse or you're someone who works in an environment where others are at risk, you should still get the vaccine and speak to your primary care provider to ensure.
Yeah, that's very clear. The next question is from Nair. For people with multiple sclerosis, is it safe to take the vaccine? Is there one type of vaccine that is better for MS patients than the other?
I've actually done a bunch of webinars on this with the MS Society and the neurology group. So perfect question. Thank you for asking. The good news is we feel very confident that these vaccines are going to be extremely safe for MS patients, almost irrespective of the type of immunosuppressive therapy they're on, in terms of disease-modifying therapies or biologic drugs. The specific question would be around the timing of the initiation or the provision of whatever immunosuppressive therapy. There are some what are called T-cell depleting therapies that are very potent that are used. There's a drug called alemtuzumab, and there's some others in which the timing may want to be adjusted a little bit, especially if you haven't started it yet. And you can speak to your MS practitioner, your neurologist about that. But we have seen by and large, looking at other studies from a whole host of other vaccines that have been used in MS patients, even when they're on biologic therapy, that they do just fine. And in fact, that getting the disease is that much more likely to create a flare of MS and create more problems than the vaccine itself. So I hope I can give you some confidence that 95+% of the time, getting the vaccine is not only safe, but really important if you have MS.
I want to remind the panelists we're almost heading into at 2:00, and we have so many questions that have come in. So we won't be able to answer all of them. We may have to do another one of these if you guys are both available. But last, I'm hoping.
I'm happy to stick around a little bit longer.
Yeah,
I won't
we can
put any
extend
pressure.
a little bit, Shaheen.
Okay, that'd be great. That would be wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so the next question is, there has been public statements from Pfizer about potential shortage on the vaccine. Will the rise of mutations with the vaccine need to not strands be modified?
I think that there is the possibility that if the mutations become very, very prevalent to the point that they're becoming potentially the dominant strains, as is, it's been the case in parts of the UK, there is the potential that the vaccines can be re-engineered, that the mRNA can actually be redesigned entirely, and that it could be more effective against these mutant strains. The problem is that obviously is not going to occur overnight. That's going to be a process that takes time, potentially at least several weeks to a few months. And in that period of time, we're stuck with what we have right now. And so our best defense is actually not tempting fate, and it's doing what we're supposed to be doing with masking and distancing and limiting contacts, again, to not put pressure on the vaccines we have right now.
Absolutely. And I think we also have to focus on the percentage of the variant strains we're seeing in our province and nationally. So I think keeping that in mind, we're going to have to rely on the experts saying, as far as the vaccines are concerned, is this really enough to change direction at this point, right? So that's going to be something that may happen in the fall. But I mean, when we see with the flu shot, what tends to happen is we end up kind of following the curve versus kind of changing ahead of the curve, I would say. So I think in practicality, probably up until the spring and summer, there may be no change. So,
yeah, thank you. The next question is from Andrew. Is the COVID-19 vaccine vegan? Does it contain any animal ingredients?
I have no idea, so I'll let Dr. Sharkawy do this.
So as I mentioned, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are completely made out of synthetic material. The mRNA is synthesized in a lab. The rest is sugar, salts, other stabilizers, and lipids. There's absolutely no animal ingredients in there. I know for the Jewish or Muslim faith, there's concerns about gelatins. There's no animal gelatins in there. And ditto for the vector-based vaccines. Some of them will use these fetal cell lines, but again, apart from that, they're fairly similar in terms of the constituents. It's still a composition of salts, sugars, water, and other things that are not animal-based.
Thank you. Okay, so the next question is from Nadira. As a breastfeeding mother, it is my understanding I cannot get the vaccine. Are there studies that show the effects of vaccines and breastfeeding on babies? And if so, what were some of the issues seen in babies?
I mean, it's not, as far as I know, there's not much information in terms of studies.
Yeah.
But it is going to come down to, I'm sure Dr. Sharkawy will emphasize, is the fact that we're seeing it in practice, we're seeing it in reality. I would probably say as a family doctor, I want all of the patients or all the, I guess, everyone on the call today to realize that, you know what, this is actually our jobs, like as your family doctor. So reach out to your primary care provider, your family doctor, and get educated about pregnancy, breastfeeding. And it's very important because that is really something where I would say we're learning as we go. It's very important to start to say, let me get all the information. The other thing is, I do want to emphasize for a lot of the breastfeeding moms that with sick kids, there is the mother risk department that's just excellent. So anything that will be updated for breastfeeding and lactation will be updated there as well. So you can always call in and directly ask your questions, and you'll get assigned a counselor, and they've been very helpful with my patients. So.
Yeah, viruses spread and are transmitted much more effectively through breast milk than vaccines, very simply put. The vaccines are designed in a way that they do their work and they kind of disappear after that. So once that lipid sheath falls off of the mRNA, for example, when it's getting into our cells and it triggers that immune response to start making the spike proteins, the mRNA largely disappears. It dissolves. It doesn't enter our circulation in any appreciable quantity. And that small amount that would be present in breast milk, for example, would almost certainly be destroyed and inactivated by the stomach acid of the nursing infant. So there's no concern whatsoever from my point of view and from the biology and kinetics of how these vaccines work, that this should be a problem for nursing mothers. Please go ahead and get the vaccine and feel free to breastfeed if that's what is deemed safe and best for you and your child.
Great answer. The next question is from Shazia. Can you still spread COVID-19 after you get vaccinated? Good one.
Yeah, I think we touched on that before. Basically, there are gaps.
There are.
Time between which your immunity becomes fully constituted, and in that period of time, you may very well get potentially a more attenuated, a modified, or less severe form of the virus, but nevertheless, it may be there, and so you're still at risks.
Mm-hmm. The next one is from Sean. Oh, no, that one went away. The next one is from, oh, sorry, it's back. Dr. Sharkawy, I understand that you have had the vaccine, but I think Dr. Lubna Tirmizi has also said she's had the vaccine. So you both can answer the question. Can you tell us about what your experience was like?
Sure. I mean, I'll be 100% honest.
Me too.
I was a bit surprised. It did hurt more than I thought it would.
Okay.
Immediately, I think, immediately I felt very little. I think a lot of it was just feeling giddy and very excited and very keyed up about getting it. But my arm was more sore than is typically the case with most vaccines. So it definitely hurt more than a flu shot did. And, but it was, a day and a half. And I found that with Tylenol and ice, it certainly made things more manageable. The other thing is that with the second dose, I did get a little bit of fever and chills the night of, but it was fairly short-lived again. And I almost was encouraged by that because that told me my body was reacting appropriately and my immune system was very nicely triggered. And at the end of the day, the symptoms went away fairly quickly. I actually didn't miss a single day of work. I went to work every day following the second dose as well. And I'm here. So I'm being completely transparent. It wasn't a walk in the park, but it also was very manageable and totally reasonable. And what I would recommend is ice your arm for sure and take plenty of Tylenol, especially before the second dose. Don't take Advil or ibuprofen or anything that's a non-steroidal, even though it may be very helpful from a pain relieving standpoint. There is some theoretical not proven, but theoretical possibility it may actually limit or impair your immune response compared to Tylenol or a non-steroidal type of fever or pain reliever. So I would just leave that caveat to end on.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so I'll just add, I want everyone to know that I've had to have 2 COVID tests per week for the last several months for my long-term care home. So when I compare, vaccines to me are kind of like the vaccine experience tends to be with the person. It varies according to who's giving me the vaccine, I would say. So sometimes I have great experiences on my arm and sometimes it's painful. For me, it was what Dr. Sharkawy said in terms of the second vaccine. I had nothing with the first at all. The second vaccine, I think day 2, so the day after was same thing, muscle aches and pains, fever, chills. So that is something that everyone should kind of be anticipating as a good thing, but also is just something where you control it with the Tylenol. But compared to doing the 2 nasal swabs per week, I would say it wasn't really more painful than that. So it was fine. So,
or compared to a ventilator, right?
Yeah, when you think about that, yes.
I think we've started to really, it's hit us in the second wave, and we've seen so many people in the hospital. So, Okay, so I mean, we're over to 2 o'clock. We're at 2:06. I will take one last question, and then I guess we'll wrap it up. The last question is from Jabeen. I'm allergic to sulfa. How is the vaccine safe for people having sulfa or any other allergies? And we've kind of touched on this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we'll just wrap it up. Thank you very, very much. This concludes our panel discussion. Your time, your expertise, and insights are greatly appreciated. It was a really informative hour. Thank you to all the participants for joining virtually and trusting us to bring you vaccine information. We hope this panel discussion has been beneficial to you, and it will make you make an informed decision for your personal health, really. Maybe we can do this again. A second live question and answer, and get more feedback, because right now, it seems that a large number of people are still waiting to hear. And
yeah,
exactly. So
can I just add just something small to end with here? I think we have to be very careful not to lose our perspective right now. I think when we look back on the past year and change, universally we're tired. We're very depleted. Some of us have really incurred some huge losses, whether it's personally or financially, physically or otherwise. And I think that there is a temptation right now, especially when we hear about vaccines emerging, even if we haven't received them ourselves, to really give in and resign ourselves to whatever form of COVID fatigue we have been susceptible to. And we have to be very careful to remember that this is the worst possible time to do it. Mm-hmm. We really have to step up for each other and support each other through this time to make sure that we hang on a little bit longer and we give each other the support that we need to make sure that we get through really the last stage of this. And, inshallah, this should be the last stage of this. And I just want to share one little anecdote with you that I think really hit home for me here a couple of weeks ago. I took my kids out to a pizza joint way out in Scarborough. I live in Mississauga, but it was a nice drive and a reason to get the kids out. And we ordered some takeout from there. And when I went inside to get the food, I noticed that there were a lot of people working in the kitchen, and all of them were young people. They looked like they couldn't have been more than 25. And a few of them clearly were not wearing their masks properly or wearing them at all. And it struck me and it upset me, thinking where I am, and I've seen young people in the hospital who've been near death and some of whom have died. Trying to reconcile that with a young person in the kitchen, making me some pizza or wings. How do I make sense out of all of this? And so I asked for one of these young people to come out from the kitchen, and I talked to him, and I said, I noticed you're not wearing your mask, or you're not wearing it properly, and I'm just concerned about you. And I tried to say it in a manner that didn't feel like I was judging him or scorning him or anything else. And he looked at me and he said, "Brother, it's so hot in that kitchen. It's like 500 degrees and it's so difficult for me to do my job. I don't know what to do." And I felt so bad for him hearing this, because I understood that this wasn't just negligence on his part. It wasn't that he didn't care. It was that he was struggling. He's a young guy who's probably trying to make ends meet, by working in this hot kitchen to serve me food. And I said, "I want you to know that you're more important than anything that you're serving me right now. These chicken wings don't mean anything. This one grain of rice I would forsake if it means keeping you sick." And there were tears in his eyes when he heard me say this, because I recognized he understood that I was just trying to help him. It's not about me being right and him being wrong, but me recognizing that we struggle through these times, not because we don't care, but because we have our own limitations. And I told him, "Brother, please, if you are having a difficult time, I want to make sure that your boss gives you the time to either take a break and go outside and get a few minutes of fresh air, or put a fan in the kitchen, or do something to keep you safe, because the food that I get is worth nothing if it puts your life at risk." I think it's a microcosm of what we're dealing with all over our communities, where there are challenges that we face, where young people and old people alike are struggling and they have difficulties dealing with the hand that has been dealt to them. We need to help each other. We need to do it in a non-judgmental way. And inshallah, if we try to stand together and support each other, we'll get through this. So everybody out there knows somebody just like that, mashallah, beautiful young man in the kitchen. Help him out.
It's 2:12. It's a hard stop at 2:15 because we're going to clock out. So I'll just quickly say, once again, today's panel discussion has been brought to you by DMA. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram. You can also reach us by email at info@thedma.ca. Thank you so much, Dr. Abdu Sharkawy and Dr. Lubna Tirmizi. It's been a really great, informative hour. And to all the participants, thank you for putting in your questions and joining us today. Maybe we can do this again.
Absolutely. And Shahina, I was going to add, as the vaccine rollout goes further in and we actually start to bring it to the community, it's a great idea to touch base again.
I think so too. And I think we will. We'll definitely have to speak behind the scenes and get something with the two of you again. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.